The convoy SC7 was found by a scouting line. I remember that I was the southernmost submarine in that scouting line, and I got a signal by searchlight from my classmate Frauenheim, to my right, to the north. Enemy in sight on starboard. Well, I approached the convoy. I found it because the escorts were firing star shell. It was fairly easy for me to penetrate the screen of the escorts and getting into the convoy proper. But I found out the ships in there were very different, some very small ones I had never seen. And I also suspected that the convoy was fairly slow. And really, when firing at one ship, I missed it, and it hit another ship on the next row. So I overestimated the speed. After having sunk a few ships, I was driven out somehow of the convoy. I don't remember whether I was driven out or had to dive. Anyway, I found myself again at the rear of the convoy and had to get into it again from the rear. But this was fairly easy for me. I was a fan of getting into convoy, so altogether, the convoy was attacked, I don't know how many submarines, by the whole of the scouting line, all of them, and it was more or less destroyed. I think only 1/10 of it got home. Escorts fired star shell outside. Of course, there they got the submarines trying to get closer to the convoy from the outside, but I was safe inside. This was another proof to always try to get into the convoy proper and not staying outside, because otherwise, outside it would have been driven away. As a midshipman, when preparing for the English interpreter's examination, I had to read as many English books on World War I. And I had found out that the British intelligence knew everything about U-boats. And that I said, I will, when the new war comes, never use my communication at sea, except when I am in touch with the enemy. Then he knows that I am there. Things became different. There was so much communications used, which was, to my mind, very, very superfluous, and so that British intelligence, they knew what was coming, and that we were playing Army, Navy, Air Force with open cards and not the enemy. And that's why we lost the war. Maybe you don't know how Preen and U-47 perished. Nobody knows. The British Admiralty has a committee, assessing committee, I think they call it. And now, about 50 years after the war, last year it was, they found out that the war diaries with HMS Wolverine and the submarine UA are exactly the same. UA, I remember at that time, at that convoy, withdrew heavily damaged. And it is known that HMS Wolverine was credited with having sunk U-47, which they found out is not true. And the question now is, how did U-47 sink? And I was also asked to give some explanation because I was on the same convoy. Very likely it was U-47 sunk by its own torpedo. The torpedoes were so bad we had that quite a lot of them were circle runners. And after firing them, they made a circle and hit the firing boat. My radio man, who also managed the listening device, were always asked to find out whether the torpedo was running straight or was it circle runner, otherwise it would go deep immediately. I also remember before the war and during the war, when at the firing range in the Baltic Sea, some submarines had found out that they were hit by their own torpedoes. They were not live torpedoes. For instance, one I remember was hit at the stern so that his rudder was damaged, and another one told me that his surface gun was damaged. So our torpedoes, it's just awful. And my opinion is, if we had torpedoes which would work all right, we could have sunk double the tonnage we really had.